Hello, everyone. Angela here as a part of our Peace and Justice series for Acropolis Boston. And one man that we're going to talk about today who did this is Viktor Frankl. He was an Austrian psychiatrist, neurologist, author, and philosopher, and he was also a Holocaust survivor. And his incredible experiences throughout his life gives us a sense of what it means to be a human being driven by a sense of purpose, and whose insight into the human mind is one we can look to in our search for inner peace and justice. And today I'm joined actually by two psychotherapists, Sheila and Claire. And both are very familiar with Viktor Frankl's work and together have collectively over 30 years experience of their own to bring to this discussion. And I'm happy to have you both here. But before we start, I'll read a quote by Viktor Frankl that I think really sets the tone for what we're going to be discussing today. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. What's something people should know about him that could be helpful for their own lives?
The first image that comes to mind is a man who probably at that time was in his 60s, and you see him like scaling a mountain, and evidently he discovered that passion following the Holocaust, after he survived the Holocaust. And for me, I'm just thinking about the metaphor of the mountain, and what that involves. To scale a mountain, that involves determination, that involves having a vision, having hope, that anything is possible, and that you can overcome any kind of obstacles in life if you have determination. That you persevere, you don't give up, you fight the fight, you reach for the heights, and nothing is impossible. The other thing, there are many other examples of what I admire about Viktor Frankl and his life and what he contributed to society was that he had somewhat humble beginnings in Austria. In Vienna, he grew up in a family in which his father was a civil servant. And then during World War I, the family lost everything, to the point that he and his siblings would go begging for food from farmers. So he understood at a very young age what it was like to suffer. And he didn't seem to take anything for granted. He decided that he wanted to dedicate his life to helping others, to become a doctor, to become a psychiatrist. And when he finished his medical school, he worked at the suicide pavilion, which was with women who had been suicidal. And during his watch, no one passed away. Later on, he also established a program for workers who were unemployed. And he felt that it was important that they continued to find a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. And they did volunteer work. So all these experiences that he had segue into his theory of logotherapy. And I know, Claire Leith, if you want to contribute something to that.
Sure. So thank you for highlighting some of those key moments of Viktor Frankl's life. Certainly all that led up to that, his experience in Auschwitz and the camps. So something that had struck me is that he didn't develop logotherapy during his time at the concentration camps. He already had developed it, and he had a full manuscript, which then he completely lost. But he'll say that really what happened in the camps is that it went from theory to practice. So logotherapy began to be something that was quite literally in his flesh and bones. And then he came out of that experience and with renewed passion to help others and utilize this method of psychotherapy based on pulling out people's will to meaning. So, and something else that maybe some people don't know about is that when he first published his book, his bestseller, Man's Search for Meaning in 1946, it was actually anonymous because he didn't want it to make it about himself. He wanted to, in his own words, to inspire people in all types of situations, including, illnesses and other kind of chronic, painful experiences. He wanted to inspire people in that, well, if I was able to survive such horrific circumstances, then perhaps I can inspire you as well to do so as well. So, and then it became so popular that he had to put his name because he figured I will be even more helpful by being invited to speak and traveling the world and speaking to as many human beings as I can. But that's also speaks a lot about himself, I think, is first anonymous and then utilizing his person as a vehicle to deliver a message. And there was also a very poignant moment when he was at Auschwitz. He says that he was told to put on obviously some ragged pants and jacket, and he didn't know whether he was going to be led to his death. And in that moment, he just found in the pocket of the jacket, he found this old, worn out Jewish prayer that he was familiar with. And just the finding of that prayer was a turning point for him. It really ignited this determination to maintain his meaning, his search for meaning throughout his experience. And then he wasn't led to his death. He was led to forced labor. And we know he then became a confidant or even provided some psychotherapy to guards, to fellow inmates, to just humans around him. And he was considered a beacon of light both by guards and by inmates.
If you could tell me what is the definition of, like, what is logotherapy to you? Because I think people might not be as familiar with that. And
Logotherapy for me means a meaning-centered psychotherapy. To find meaning no matter what the circumstances one goes through in life. And like I had said earlier, he was inspired by all these tragedies, growing up, beginning of the 20th century, in the midst of 2 major world wars, starvation, depression, all these things that were happening. And that's what inspired him to write his theory about making meaning. And that's what logotherapy means.
those are really powerful details to share about his life. And Claire-Elise, I know you mentioned there were sort of 3 ways to pull out one's will to meaning, or you wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of the will to meaning that Viktor Frankl coined in that book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Sure. So you were mentioning before, what, in relation to that, what can we take from Viktor Frankl's life? And I think, again, it's that it's the teaching by example, it's the inspiration by example. So it's through his own experience, but also decades of, he passed when he was 92 years old, right? So that's decades of really dedicating himself to his craft, to his service, to his trade, and of helping others find their own will to meaning and bringing out others' will to meaning. But he says that there are 3 main things that activate that will to meaning, and that is giving oneself. One is giving oneself to purposeful work. So, as Joseph Campbell will say, who studied cross-cultural mythology for decades as well, very passionate and dedicated individual as well, he would say, follow your bliss. And for Viktor Frankl, it's find your passion. It's dedicate yourself to something greater than yourself. And that's how the will to meaning, that for Viktor Frankl is, it's a motivational force that is inherent in all individuals. So for him, every human being has it somewhere inside, and often it lays dormant, often it needs to be activated. And so one is engaging in purposeful work. Another one is when we give our love, when we deeply love another human in any type of love, that also has a way of getting us in a way, to reach something beyond ourselves. And the third way is finding meaning in suffering. And interestingly, for Viktor Frankl, happiness, that's how one experiences happiness. That happiness is not a pursuit in itself, but that happiness is a byproduct of these three searches for meaning: in purposeful work, in the love of another, the dedication to another, which doesn't mean forgetting oneself, but it means just reaching beyond oneself and finding meaning in suffering.
Oh, thank you for that. That idea of, despite what we may be going through, that that as long as we're maintaining our integrity to ourselves, to our own sort of what we believe is right to do, and also even too just in the attitude we choose to take on as we look at our suffering. I think that's a great piece of advice for people. So thank you. And next question I had here: what role did philosophy play in Viktor Frankl's work? Because we know Viktor Frankl really was a philosopher, meaning a lover of wisdom, and you are both philosophers here. How did that study of really seeking wisdom help or impact his work, and also your own, just knowing what a power that has?
Well, as you said, Angela, when we think of philosophy, philosophia, love of wisdom. So just like Viktor Frankl's will to meaning, love of wisdom is also a motivational force, right? It's something that moves us forward, engages us on a search for something that we want to conquer, that we want to attain, that we want to experience, that we want to integrate, make ours. And so then for the philosophies of East and West, this love of wisdom is transformational. You can't go on this journey and remain the same. It transforms, as we say, head, heart, and hands, right? Our thoughts, our emotions, our actions, our way of life. And so
what advice would you give to people on this journey through meaning making, through suffering or through crisis?
Well, my piece of advice would be that you are not alone, that there is help there. And in this age of technology, there are lots of different avenues that people can seek out and find support.
I definitely agree with Sheila. I think that's a hard learned lesson for me as well, is that we don't have to go through it alone. And I do think that for all of us, or almost all humans, at some point in our life, it will feel like the rug is pulled out from under our feet. And as one of my favorite authors is Pema Chodron, and one of my favorite books is When Things Fall Apart. And it's those moments when we feel that things fall apart. And the second part of the title is Hard Advice for Difficult Times, which means that, right, that's what the book is about, that actually there are ways of relating to those groundless moments differently. And I think one of those ways to do it differently is to reach out. That sometimes we just need a buddy on the path, and that might be a therapist, it might be a friend, it might be a stranger, even sometimes it might be, but we don't have to do it alone.
And just to leave us, with one last note, we're actually filming this video on Mental Health Awareness Day within Mental Health Awareness Month, which we think is something really important that people need to, be aware of, and also be mindful of and cognizant of their own mental health, and to not be afraid to, as you said, reach out. That sometimes you just need a friend on the path to help you process your own sort of, what's happening in your life. Any final thoughts here? Final things we want to leave people with on this day, both of you?
So I will share one of my favorite quotes by Viktor Frankl, which is, each man is questioned by life, and he can only answer to life by answering for his own life. To life, he can only respond by being responsible. And I think that everything we've talked about today is related to responsibility, to becoming responsible for our experiences, taking ownership of our thoughts, our emotions, our difficulties, our strengths, our superpowers, and that sometimes asking for help is being responsible, is being courageous, is being, I think, as Brene Brown would say, courageously vulnerable.
Amazing. Well, thank you. I want to say, Claire and Sheila, thank you both for taking the time to talk to us about this really, this incredibly important topic, and sharing your wisdom with us, and your love of Viktor Frankl and his work. And for those of you watching, I hope you enjoyed the discussion as well. And